When I was a young pastor serving a church in Louisville, Kentucky, I taught a small Wednesday evening Bible class in the church basement for about 25 church members. And a few miles away, on the same side of town, there was a very popular bar called the Toy Tiger. To boost their Wednesday evening trade, at the same time I was teaching a Bible class, they held a weekly competition called the Naughty Nighty Night. I would often thank the 24 or so members of the church who attended my Bible class for choosing my class over going to Naughty Nighty competition. Just for clarification, one man asked me once, "Now, Roger, you don't seriously think that the other choice for us was to go to the Toy Tiger?" But of course, for any class member, the drive time would have been about the same. They were all over 21. Any one of them could have made the legal choice to avail themselves of some ribald entertainment if that had been their preference. But for everyone in the room, including myself, our religious worldview did not include that kind of entertainment as a viable option. Though my theological education had pretty well extinguished any serious literal view of a divine judgment in which the fate of my eternal soul would be decided, sending me either into eternal reward or eternal torturous punishment, still the shadow of a lifetime of training to believe that God was really kind of like Santa Claus. Sees you when you're sleeping, knows when you're awake, knows if you've been bad or good. So we all inherently knew that we were supposed to be good for goodness sake. We had grown up being indoctrinated into a moral universe in which the boundaries had been drawn by the Lord God Almighty from the heavens above. We didn't have to struggle with complicated moral decisions about most things because very clear, bright lines had been drawn centuries before, and they had, after all, been written down in a book. And you weren't allowed to seriously question that book. Progressive religious leaders invite people to lead a good life because of the inherent value of leading a good life, which is rather vague. It's an invitation that doesn't sound concrete enough to those who were reared on the carrot and the stick of either going to hell or going to heaven. Once that manipulative theology has been taken off the table, we have to do some serious thinking about who we are, who we want to be, why we want to live in a universe of right and wrong of our own definition. Not because some supernatural theistic God in the clouds told us what is right and what is wrong, but rather we are left to figure it out for ourselves. We have to figure out whether a thing on its own merits is either good or evil. I introduced this book talking about evidence-based faith. I'm advocating for an approach to religion that is based on what is known and not that is based on Iron Age mythologies and superstitions. Physicists sum up the entire universe as being comprised of 12 different particles of matter held together by 4 forces of nature, only 2 of which we can see at work, gravity and magnetism. The other 2 are observable only at the atomic level, and they have the rather unromantic names of the weak force and the strong force. You never get to see them at work, so it doesn't really matter what the poetic nomenclature is, but they basically hold atoms together and make them behave in ways that make it possible for us to have a universe. But accepting this description of reality, that we are made, quite literally, of the stuff that was created in the center of super-hot stars, 12 particles of matter and 4 forces of nature that give our bodies exactly the same 12 particles of matter and 4 forces of nature that make up the chair that you are sitting in, the bricks in the walls around us, the trees, grass, and stream down the road, and the stars and planets that are above us in the heavens. As cosmologist Brian Swimme has observed, 4 billion years ago, the earth was basically molten rock. Now it sings opera. We are the product of millions of years of evolution, and therefore we are the part of the universe that can now contemplate itself. We are the part of those 12 particles of matter and 4 forces of nature that can think about our own existence and seek meaning. In fact, I would argue we are the part of the universe that creates meaning. So here's the big shift. The breathtaking, dizzying, sometimes infuriating and frightening shift. You were taught not to question religion. You were taught to accept that the Bible is the Word of God. You were taught that America is the greatest country in the world. You were taught to believe that capitalism was just a part of democracy and freedom and Christianity, and that you were to defend all of the above, even with your lives if called upon to do so, with blind faith and absolute loyalty. And that, men and women, is the opposite of where we are now. The old unquestioning approach to life stopped working for most of us. Some of us read our way out of it. Some of us just thought our way out of it. Or we were pushed out of it through personal hardships and heartbreaks. And I'm guessing for most of us, it was a combination of all of those things. Now we understand that to really find meaning, we have to question everything. We have not thrown away our sacred scriptures, but we no longer read the Bible as if God wrote it and that it was divine legislation. We now critically examine it. Through science, through rational thought, through critical analytical thinking, we literally interrogate the universe to find out what is true and what is not true. I remember hearing the famous author and psychiatrist M. Scott Peck saying that anything that you cannot question is an idol, and all idols are slated for destruction. We have protected our religious idols from scrutiny and preserved them into the 21st century, but no longer will we, for example, reject our gay sons and daughters because some ancient nomadic sheep herder condemned homosexuality 3 years ago and got it written down in a book. That no longer carries any moral weight for us. I introduced this chapter with a quote from Dr. Todd Scheibel, who's the director of Burrell Mental Health. About 15 years ago, I had applied for and received a grant from the Burrell Foundation to conduct a research project into methamphetamine use in the Ozarks. Todd called me into his office to talk about the project, and he told me there were 3 essential elements that had to be in our final product of our research. We have to say what is so. We have to say why it matters, so what? And then so. So what do you do? That is, our research needed to discover the facts about what was leading to the rapid increase in use and addiction to this dangerous drug, but further, we needed to be able to articulate clearly why it mattered. We needed to be able to tell the general public, the municipal, county, and state governments why they should care. And finally, we needed to do more than just throw facts on the table. Our analysis needed to answer the question, so what can we do about it? What is so? So what? So. That conversation has never left me because I've applied it to my life as a pastor and as a journalist and as a college professor. I don't just gather facts as if I were about to print a phone book or contribute to a database. I need to be able to stand up in front of a congregation, a classroom, or write for a newspaper column or a book what is factually true. Then I need to be able to say why it matters, and finally, I need to be able to say what should be done in response to those facts. If there's a single compelling reason for me to be writing this book about progressive faith, it is to answer the so part of this equation. Many wonderful scholars and writers have described the reasons why we have made this dramatic shift in how we read the Bible and what we think about Jesus and other world religions. I am deeply indebted to the disciplined and insightful work of Marcus Borg, John Shelby Spong, John Dominic Crossan, Karen Armstrong, and Springfield's own Charles Hedrick and David Trobish for helping us all to understand this very clear and objective approach to what had been protected idols of faith. They've done a magnificent job of looking at the Christian religion and helping us to see what is so. And they've done an admirable job of telling us why it matters. And yet each of them has felt the need, as religious scholars, to stop there, to hardly ever speak of that third so. They've left it to us to figure out what is the so of progressive faith. So if you're backing your car out of the driveway and you have to make a decision, church or the toy tiger? More realistically, once you've been disabused of the superstitious beliefs in a supernatural theistic being who will decide right and wrong, who will send you to some eternal part of hell or heaven, once we are no longer captured in that intellectual and moral prison, the question becomes, is life to be lived for personal gratification, or do we have a larger purpose in existing? If I sit down on a park bench to eat my sandwich and a homeless, hungry stranger sits down next to me, do I devour my sandwich as quickly as possible, or do I divide it and share it with the hungry stranger? Friedrich Nietzsche, would tell you that you are weak if you even consider giving half of your sandwich to the hungry stranger. Or at least that's how Ayn Rand would interpret Nietzsche. I don't expect all of you to have read Nietzsche or Ayn Rand. You just have to understand I have a certain misspent youth in which I got a philosophy degree. But at least to some degree, the way that our economy has been run, the way our banks, our corporations, and sadly enough our government basically looks like the objectivism of Ayn Rand's school of self-gratification is being lived out. Now, they talk about Christian values, they talk about church, they talk about morality, but if you really squeeze it, several prominent economists and politicians are huge fans of Ayn Rand, a fairly sick byproduct of the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. We here are trying to choose a spiritual worldview that is based on a global approach to ethics. Now, scientific thought deals with facts, but facts alone cannot determine an ethical direction. I've spent years inviting you to reject what cannot be known, what has only been presented to you as an assertion of religious truth. There may be angels and demons, a heaven, a hell, there may be souls and ghosts and spirits, but since we cannot objectively analyze any of those things, I've repeatedly said that it is meaningless to discuss them. But at the baseline of my progressive faith, I must acknowledge that I am making an assumption. I'm making a truth claim. Between the life of personal self-fulfillment, whether you find that at the toy tiger or you find it at Wall Street, and a life lived to deliver the greatest good to the largest number of people, those two extremes are a choice, and a choice for which science cannot help you. Because if you flatly take objective reality, you can choose to lead an entirely self-serving life, or you can choose to live your life sacrificially. The earth that once was primarily molten lava but can now rise up and sing opera through conscious human beings also experiences tremendous pain and sorrow. And we have the potential of experiencing deep meaning and substantive joy. The choice that I make, the choice I hope you make, is to answer that so question in a way that is not simply seeking personal gratification, but is instead to direct your life in a way that gives the greatest good to the largest number of people. I previously quoted Neil deGrasse Tyson saying that we are all connected to each other biologically, to the earth chemically, and to the universe atomically. That is a scientific fact, but I am choosing to credit that scientific fact with spiritual meaning. I will honor my connection to every human being, to the earth, to the universe, by trying to reduce suffering, to increase joy, to protect the integrity of life, and to protect the integrity of the earth and the universe as well. Owning my connection to the human race and to the earth we share, I cannot be indifferent about the fact that there are hungry people in this city, even if I am personally overfed. I cannot be indifferent about the threat of waging war, even if I am personally far beyond the age that any army would ever want to draft me. The fact that I am employed does not dilute the fact that many people are not employed, nor does my access to health care afford me the luxury of being indifferent to those who do not receive appropriate care. The fact that my neighborhood is free of toxic waste, that I have reliably clean drinking water and fresh air, cannot make me indifferent about the poisoning of the soil, the water, and the air on our shared earth. Being white, male, heterosexual, and American does not excuse me from the need for liberation from oppression for persons of color, for women, for those of all sexual orientations and races and nations of the world. And the fact that I was free to choose where I drove my car this morning does not deny the fact that more than 2 million Americans are in jail or prison right now, many of whom are incarcerated for reasons that are wholly indefensible. And that itself is a social crime for us if we choose to keep silent about it. Once Nietzsche was freed from the domination of traditional religion, his choice did not make him the Übermensch, the Superman that he thought it did. In fact, followed to the logical conclusions of selfishness and self-service, existence has no meaning at all. Nietzsche did not leave the cave of religious superstition to evolve into a superhuman. He left it to de-evolve into meaninglessness. The real Übermensch, the real heroes of postmodern existence are those of you who choose to take your liberty in hand and to live lives of self-sacrificing service, kicking at the darkness until it bleeds daylight.
Amen.
You've been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at reverenddray@aol.com for more information.